Hello, my name is Kirsten Brockman. I am a fourth year doctoral student at the University of Memphis, and I study sexual and reproductive health communication. This is a little bit of a different situation to do a National Communication Association annual conference presentation in, but hopefully without the fancy introduction and technology, I can still be just as engaging virtually. So let's get started. The title of my presentation is Your Pleasure is Valid, Evolving, and Fucking Glorious, a content analysis of sex positive, inclusive sex educators on Instagram. Public sexual education curricula in the United States varies by state on topics including HIV, contraception, and prophylactics, with most lessons including information regarding queer health entirely. When present, most programs maintain the primary objectives of reducing adolescent pregnancy rates and instances of sexually transmitted diseases and infections. Other content is also missing or only present under certain circumstances, and that includes topics of gender identity, consent, or pleasure. To fill the gap in available information, health professionals at private organizations and health communicators alike are pivoting from this risk preventative sexual education foci in favor of a more sex positive, pleasure inclusive, intersectional approach. Unfortunately, as funding for public sex education programs is directly restricted by legal policies which are informed by cultural and social norms, most programs have not expanded their curricula despite a fifth-year increase in STD rates in the US or irrefutable evidence deeming abstinence-only sexual education to be ineffective. This forces not only current students with sexual and reproductive health questions to look elsewhere for accurate and applicable information, but also the rest of the population who has previously interacted with ineffective or incomplete sexual education courses. Instagram has over 7 million users between 13 and 17 years old, and almost 30 million users between 18 and 24 years old. So Instagram has become an active outlet for professional and novice sex educators to share information with the public through this mass media channel, which in turn can be learned and applied through the modeling of these behaviors. Hashtags like sex educator or variations thereof have over 82,000 posts currently on Instagram. So we understand through theories like Bandura's social learning theory and Gerbner's cultivation theory that people learn through observation and interaction with various media. So the purpose of this research is to determine if pleasure and inclusivity are the primary goals of these self-proclaimed sex educators on Instagram. So I did a content analysis as the only coder. I looked at 11 different Instagram accounts. The account had to have at least 10,000 followers by November 15th and had to have some variation of sex educator, human sexuality expert, sex coach in the biography. I looked at each of the 11 accounts' top 9 photos or video reels, and Instagram stories were not included in this assessment. Initially, I wanted to use hashtag SexEd in order to locate these 11 accounts that I would be looking at, but due to the election, there are restrictions posted on Instagram for different hashtags. So I was not able to see the most popular posts at the time. So instead, I pivoted a little bit and did hashtag sex educator, which then allowed me to dig through the most popular posts with that hashtag. The next kind of hurdle in this research was figuring out, with such a large variance between the accounts, how to determine what the top 9 photos were, since you can't do every third or every 10th, because that would give one account a larger weight in the content analysis than another account. So instead, I did most liked posts, and I used the program Top 9, which many of you have probably used for your year-end reviews on Instagram. It was the only program that allowed me to assess the top 9 posts based on likes without actually owning the account, which obviously I do not. So I then went into each of the individual 11 accounts and took screenshots of not only all of the top 9 posts, but all of the captions for each photo. So hundreds of photos, but only 99 posts that I was assessing. Then I had to make a coding form, and I based this coding form on the Guttmacher Institute's content requirements for sex and HIV education and sex education, including life skills, sexual content, relationships, and prevention of violence. You'll see in this next slide, these are the categories that I actually used. So I combined some of the Guttmacher Institute's categories, but I also added my own categories for things like mental health, which I knew was just going to be prominent based on following some of these accounts previously, and then gender and pleasure, which gender and sexual orientation speak to the inclusivity piece of the research question, and pleasure speaks to the pleasure piece of the research question. So let's quickly go through the artifacts. These photos will show not only the account, but also the top 9 photos. Feel free to pause and take a more in-depth look. I will not be showing every single photo that each account had. I'm just pulling some exemplars for the themes. So the first account that I looked at was Ruby Rare. I tried really hard to interact with these accounts a little bit more in depth so I could see what the person's gender identity was or sexual orientation if they had that listed, learn the pronunciation of the account's names, that kind of stuff, so I could include that in the analysis. Ruby Rare is actually the quote that this project is named after. You'll see that Ruby is a queer non-monogamist and uses she, her pronouns. The next account was the Sex Rat podcast. This is one of 2 podcasts that popped up in the analysis. Next is Sex Education, primarily account looking at STDs and STIs, but also relationship related things. Next, we have Super Smash Cash, which is primarily a toy critiquing account, but also sex education. Next, we have the second podcast, Sex Ed with DB podcast, which says that they also feature LGBTQ plus people and people of color. Next, we have Rhea of Eve, who also identifies as queer, polyamorous, and a sex educator. Next is Sex with Emily, Doctor of Human Sexuality. The next account is What's My Body Doing? You'll see there's also an additional focus of LGBTQ plus and social justice and pleasure. Erica Smith.sex.ed is also the next sex educator. The Cameron Glover, certified sex educator. And finally, Uzo Matakuzo, which is sex educator, who is a sex educator and a certified family therapist, relationship and sex coach. So let's look at some exemplars and some themes of what I found. 2 of the categories, abstinence only and negative outcomes of teen sex, did not occur at all in any of the 99 posts. I will say once abstinence popped up in one of the 99 posts, but it was not promoting abstinence, so I didn't count it. It was critiquing abstinence. Then we're going to look at the top 3, which were pleasure, had 25 posts, mental health had 15, biological information and physical anatomy also had 15, so they kind of tied for second. And then the 3 categories that speak to the research question, which was inclusivity and pleasure as a primary focus, with gender and sexual orientation being one category, inclusivity and pleasure being the next. So first, let's talk about biological information and physical anatomy. 15 posts talked specifically about this. Ruby Rare was the most prominent account talking about biological information and physical anatomy, with 5 out of 9 posts discussing things like these exemplars, clitorises get erections too, or does lots of belly appreciation posts. There was also with Sex with Emily, Super Smash Cash, and Uzo Matakuzo posted things like your vulva is beautiful, vaginas are versatile, or hashtag thick thighs. The next category that was very prominent was mental health, also 15 posts. Erica Smith.sex.ed had 4 out of the 9 of their top posts being related to this category. You'll see this exemplar of stigmatization was one of the main themes in the mental health category. Supporting sex work and sex workers' rights as part of being sex positive. And then you'll see in the caption that they go more deeply into stigmatization of sex work. Same theme as stigmatization. You are the same person before and after you have sex for the first time. There was a lot of negating the concept of virginity, talking about how virginity is a construct present in these posts. And the last stigmatization post was sex education. There was a very popular Instagram post going around relating the current president to waiting for the current president election results to an STI. And so this post was kind of combating that stigmatization that's directly related to mental health. The next theme in mental health was related to stress. So there were two exemplars: masturbation as a form of stress relief, and then the connection between stress and sex drive were two of the big themes that you saw in these posts. Now, the inclusivity categories, the gender category only had 7 posts. I think it would have had more posts if there were not just mentions of gender. For example, Super Smash Cash mentioned non-binary in one of the posts, but didn't go into detail on any of that. Or ericasmith.sex.ed mentioned a trans writing group, but didn't go into more significant detail. These posts were kind of exemplars of the gender category, with Sex Ed with DB podcast saying trans women are women. What's My Body Doing, giving a very inclusive and much more detailed account of what can be sex rather than just cis heterosexual sex. And then ericasmith.sex.ed having the body parts don't have genders, sexual acts don't have orientations taglines. As far as sexual orientation, there were several accounts, three prominent accounts that showed Bisexual Visibility Day. What's My Body Doing actually had 3 of their top 9 posts related to Bisexual Visibility Day, with actually 5 out of their 9 posts being related to sexual orientation in general. Raya of Eve also had 2 posts that made them prominent in this category. She talked about disclosures of her own sexuality and then a celebration of International Lesbian Day. The final category is pleasure. I had 4 themes there. This is the theme of sex toys. Lots and lots and lots of these posts had to do with sex toys. Super Smash Cash had the most in that account as a sex toy critic and reviewer, but we also had Sex Education, who related the 5 love languages to sex toys, and then What's My Body Doing, doing a post about what if you can only orgasm with a vibrator. So all related directly to pleasure rather than that risk preventative angle that most sexual education content has. Next, we have orgasms. So Sex with Emily had a couple that were related directly to intensifying orgasms, or jokes about if sex was defined by having an orgasm, many women would still be virgins. And then Uzo Matakuzo was talking about a podcast that discussed orgasms as well. As far as masturbation and clitoral stimulation, ericasmith.sex.ed had a tribute to Betty Dodson, who was talking about masturbation. The Sex Wrap had a string of photos talking about oral sex for vulvas. And Sex with Emily talked about stop being intimidated by women playing with clitorises during sex. Finally, I think it's important to talk about that other category that I kind of had as a catch-all in case there was some kind of theme that popped up. For the most part, it was just book reviews or advocating for sexual education, comprehensive sexual education courses, but there was a significant theme of allyship, primarily in the Cameron Glover's posts, but also in accounts like the Sex Wrap, like you see here. People really using the platform that they already had as sex educators to try to address some of the fire that was going on in the world during this past year, which is notable and interesting as well. Couple limitations of this study. First, there's one coder, so there's always questions of intercoder reliability. 2, there was a lack of gender representation. For the most part, everyone identified their pronouns. but there were a couple of accounts that I can't make assumptions about. There was an apparent lack of male representation in these sex educators. There's also a possible use of different mediums for sex educators. Maybe they're using YouTube instead. Maybe Twitter is their jam. Instagram may not be the most applicable website or application. And then finally is the moniker of most likes. Is that the most accurate representation of these Instagram account content themes? So that kind of transitions into my future directions with that last potential limitation. It's pretty noteworthy to look at how these posts are marketed, if those are the posts that are coming up more often, but that's not necessarily their primary goal. Why are these posts specifically reaching a larger audience? Is it an audience desire for more body positivity, mental health, and sexual pleasure, or is it the use of more hashtags? What's going on there? We need to dig a little bit deeper. As far as the posts that were uplifted the most by their followers, ericasmith.sex.ed and What's My Body Doing were the most inclusive accounts as far as gender and sexual orientation information, while Super Smash Cash and Sex with Emily were the most pleasure centered, though you can see that the trend overall across the accounts was that pleasure content was the primary focus, the most posts that they were doing. So now that we've established that Instagram sex educators are more likely to discuss pleasure over other sexual education topics, future research is necessary to explore the applicability and effectiveness of these channels for different demographics, as far as age, education, socioeconomic status, and the reliability and precision of the information that they are presenting. Learning to harness the passion and the power of these educators and the platform in general will only increase sexual and reproductive health literacy, which in turn can help to address the sexual risks that traditional sexual education courses are so focused on. Thank you. Please do not hesitate to reach out if you have questions. I will also be posting this presentation on my YouTube account, which you can just find by searching my name after NCA removes all of the presentations from the bank. Thank you and have a great night.